Hey, what's happening, friend? Big Dog Ethan here, coming at you from a recording on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and this is none other than the Unnatural State of Affairs, where talk politics in the first hour and listen to some banging tunes in the second hour. Today, though, it's going to be a little bit different, so for those like me who are in the journalism school at MTSU, the school is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and as a part of that, they are having like a networking event at 5:30 p.m. at the Miller Education Center. So I need to be there for that, obviously. So I'm going to be cutting today's show short by an hour. That's a nice little tongue twister. I'm going to be cutting today's show short by an hour. And so I'm going to give you one segment. It's going to be on new revelations about the Israel Defense Forces Where's Daddy AI program. It sounds as horrific as you might imagine it to be. And I'll probably, because this segment's definitely not going to go on for terribly long. So then for the rest of the hour, I'm going to play some music. So today's show is going to be a bit truncated, but no worries, because next week I'll for sure be back with a full show for you. Absolutely. So without any further ado, AI. We've been hearing a lot about these two terrifying vowels recently, thanks in part to programs like ChatGPT. Sure, there are potential productivity benefits to AI software, but let's keep it real here. There are also a lot of massive downsides to it as well. You have the elimination of entire jobs. We've certainly been hearing a lot about that in the journalism school lately. There's also the potential for the unauthorized recreation of artists' work, whether that be in visual arts, music, film, etc. And there's also yet another potential product for a Silicon Valley tech monopoly to clutch and use as a cash printing machine. Positive or negative societal effects be damned. But we've been hearing murmurs lately about how this tech is changing military operations, especially in regards to the rumors of the Israel Defense Forces' use of AI in conducting its plausible genocide in Gaza. The Guardian published an article last December on one program called, I kid you not, The Gospel, designed to automatically detect targets for airstrikes in Gaza. I'm going to stress this. The IDF, for months now, has been using an AI program called The Gospel to acquire targets. Now, previously, the IDF has done a terrible job determining civilians from combatants just using, plain old, regular human intelligence. So would seem like employing an experimental AI program to determine military targets is, to put it lightly, a bad fucking idea. Just over a week ago, however, the independent news outlet 972 Magazine, in partnership with Israeli outlet Local Call, published a thorough article detailing a new AI system named Lavender. From the article, quote, a new investigation by 972 Magazine and Local Call reveals that the Israeli army has developed an artificial intelligence-based program known as Lavender, unveiled here for the first time. According to 6 Israeli intelligence officers, who have all served in the army during the current war on the Gaza Strip and had first-hand involvement with the use of AI to generate targets for assassination, Lavender has played a central role in the unprecedented bombing of Palestinians, especially during the early stages of the war. In fact, According to the sources, its influences on the military's operations was such that they essentially treated the outputs of the AI machine, quote, as if it were a human decision, unquote. Who the fuck thinks this is a good idea? An AI program deciding the targets that a military should strike? Yeah, nothing could go wrong there whatsoever. Now, what's the difference between the gospel system that I mentioned just a little bit ago and the lavender system? According to the article, quote, a fundamental difference between the two systems is in the definition of the target. Whereas the gospel marks buildings and structures that the army claims militants operate from, lavender marks people and puts them on a kill list, unquote. So, yeah, lavender essentially compiles a bunch of data on Gaza residents and then uses that data to determine the likeliness of certain people to be Hamas militants. The problem, unsurprisingly, is that the machine gets it wrong too frequently. Scrolling down to the part in the article that I need to cite here. Quote, B, a senior officer who used lavender, like an anonymous source, echoed to 972 in local call that in the current war, officers were not required to independently review the AI system's assessments in order to save time and enable the mass production of human targets without hindrances. I'm going to stop highlighting this. Quote, everything was statistical. Everything was neat. It was very dry, B said. He noted that this lack of supervision was permitted, despite internal checks showing that Lavender's calculations were considered accurate only 90% of the time. In other words, it was known in advance that 10% of the human targets slated for assassination were not members of the Hamas military wing at all. Side note here, what is wild about this is that if you look at the Euromed Human Rights Monitor stats that I talked about last week, they actually show that the opposite is happening right now. Rather, there is right now a 90.8% civilian death rate that in total has resulted from the indiscriminate bombings in Gaza. So I don't know where the fuck they got those numbers from. Let's continue. Quote, for example, sources explain that the lavender machine sometimes mistakenly flagged individuals who had communication patterns similar to known Hamas or PIJ operatives, including police and civil defense workers, militants' relatives, residents who happened to have a name and nickname identical to that of an operative, and Gazans who used a device that once belonged to a Hamas operative. Quote, how close does a person have to be to Hamas to be considered by an AI machine to be affiliated with the organization, said one source critical of Lavender's inaccuracy. Quote, it's a vague boundary. Is a person who doesn't receive a salary from Hamas but helps them with all sorts of things a Hamas operative? Is someone who was in Hamas in the past but is no longer there today a Hamas operative? Each of these features, characteristics that a machine would flag as suspicious, is inaccurate, unquote. Similar problems exist with the ability of target machines to assess the phone used by an individual marked for assassination. Quote, in war, Palestinians change phones all the time, said the source. People lose contact with their families, give their phone to a friend or a wife, maybe lose it. There is no way to rely 100% on the automatic mechanism that determines which phone number belongs to whom, unquote. According to the sources, the Army knew that the minimal human supervision in place would not discover these faults. Quote, there was no zero-error policy. Mistakes were treated statistically, said a source who used lavender. Quote, because of the scope and magnitude, the protocol was that even if you don't know for sure that the machine is right, you know that statistically it's fine. So you go for it, unquote. So lavender, officially speaking, the realities on the ground don't really suggest this, but technically, officially speaking, lavender has a 10% failure rate. The IDF is also fully aware of it, and yet they put virtually no adequate human verification system in place to ensure that they're not targeting civilians. This is what your tax dollars are funding. And the most that the Biden administration is willing to do about this is vaguely suggest to Benjamin Netanyahu that policy might change somehow, some way, if Israel continues to massacre civilians at this massive scale. Now, I may have already mentioned this, but I went over Euromed Human Rights Monitor's recent casualty stats last week. There is a 90.8% civilian death rate that has resulted so far from Israel's relentless attacks on the Gaza Strip. I haven't seen such a high disregard for civilian life in any conflict that I've been alive to, experience, like, in the news. And it's wild to me that the Biden administration continues to justify funding the country that it is killing civilians at such a high rate. And now, it seems we have a pretty clear understanding of the mechanisms within the IDF that's allowing for such casualties to climb. Specifically, it's the application of the Lavender's AI-generated targets to another piece of software called Where's Daddy? From the article, quote, the sources told 972 in local call that since everyone in Gaza had a private house with which they could be associated, the Army's surveillance systems could easily and automatically link individuals to family houses. In order to identify the moment operatives entered their houses in real time, various additional automatic softwares have been developed. These programs track thousands of individuals simultaneously, identifying when they are at home and send an automatic alert to the targeting officer, who then marks the house for bombing. One of several of these tracking softwares revealed here for the first time is called Where's Daddy? Quote, you put hundreds of targets into the system and wait to see who you can kill, said one source with knowledge of the system. It's called broad hunting. You copy-paste from the list that the target system produces, unquote. Evidence of this policy is also clear from the data. During the first month of the war, more than half of the fatalities, 6,120 people, belonged to 1,340 families, many of which were completely wiped out while inside their homes, according to UN figures. The proportion of entire families bombed in their houses in the current war is much higher than in the 2014 Israeli operation in Gaza, which was previously Israel's deadliest war on the Strip, further suggesting the prominence of this policy. Another source said that each time the pace of assassinations waned, more targets were added to systems like Where's Daddy to locate individuals that entered their homes and could therefore be bombed. He said that the decision of who to put into the tracking systems could be made by relatively low-ranking officers in the military hierarchy. Quote, one day, totally of my own accord, I added something like 1,200 new targets to the tracking system because the number of attacks we were conducting decreased, the source said. That made sense to me. In retrospect, it seems like a serious decision I made, and such decisions were not made at high levels, unquote. The sources said that in the first 2 weeks of the war, quote, several thousand, unquote, targets were initially inputted into locating programs like Where's Daddy. These included all the members of Hamas's elite special forces unit, the Nukba, all of Hamas's anti-tank operatives, and anyone who entered Israel on October 7th. But before long, the kill list was drastically expanded. Quote, in the end, it was everyone marked by Lavender, one source explained. Tens of thousands. This happened a few weeks later, when the Israeli brigades entered Gaza, and there were already fewer uninvolved people, i.e. civilians, in the northern areas, unquote. According to this source, even some minors were marked by Lavender as targets for bombing. Quote, normally, operatives are over the age of 17. But that was not a condition, unquote. Lavender and systems like Where's Daddy were thus combined with deadly effect, killing entire families, sources said. By adding a name from the Lavender-generated list to the Where's Daddy home tracking system, A explained, the marked person would be placed under ongoing surveillance and could be attacked as soon as they set foot in their home, collapsing the house on everyone inside. Quote, let's say you calculate that there is one Hamas operative plus 10 civilians in the house, A said. A, again, is like another anonymous Israeli Defense Force source. Quote, usually these 10 will be women and children. So, absurdly, it turns out that most of the people you killed were women and children, unquote. First, I feel like I need to acknowledge the fact that a program titled Where's Daddy, and accurately, I may say, sounds like a program that a fucking Bond villain would create. You won't make it out of my secret base, Mr. Bond. Once the Where's Daddy program activates in 10 minutes, all the fathers of your country will be blown to smithereens, throwing your country into absolute chaos. Like, if you're going to name a piece of software that's literally designed to blow away entire families, like, wouldn't you want to name it something that sounds less psychotic, maybe to disguise the fact of how horrifically insane it is? Like, maybe, I don't know, Hamas attack launcher or software 574689. Something that doesn't blatantly say, hey, this software is designed to kill families by blowing up their houses as soon as their father walks in. Like, and that's the thing, okay? The IDF doesn't even care about hiding the fact that they want to destroy the Palestinian people, not just Hamas terrorists. And why do they not care? Because they know that no matter what they do, Biden is going to bend the knee, kiss Netanyahu's ring, and continue to ship weapons to Israel under any circumstance, even if they operate a program specifically designed to blow up families as soon as their fathers come home. That's why they don't care about even trying to hide the fact that they're intentionally killing civilians. The only country with the power to immediately stop their atrocities has no will to exercise their power. And this lack of will to restrain Israel's attacks is starting to have wider implications internationally. I spoke last week about how Iran swore to avenge Israel's strike on one of their embassies in Turkey. Just now, like 5 hours ago, at the time of this recording, the BBC reported that the White House is saying Iran's threats to attack Israel are, quote, real and credible, unquote. The irony is unreal here. It's like that Eric Andre meme, the one of him shooting a guy, then turning around with a confused look on his face. The White House is like Eric Andre in that meme. The Biden administration perpetuates Israel's escalating attacks by continuing to ship them weapons, then turns around and says, uh-oh, Iran wants to attack Israel now. How did that happen? We find ourselves supplying the escalation of a broader war in the Middle East because of Biden's unwillingness to condition aid to Israel. Now, why is he actually refusing to hold Israel accountable? Sure, it could be a genuine belief that Israel has a right to defend itself, but I'll touch on that in a second. We can't ignore, however, that, well, in today's American politics, money talks. According to Open Secrets, out of all senators since the 1990s, Biden has taken the most money from pro-Israel lobbying groups, a grand total of $5,736,701. Further, Joe Biden took a total of $3.3 million from defense contractor-related groups for his 2020 campaign. Now, yes, that was actually the industry that contributed the least to his campaign, but that $3 million figure still ain't nothing to snuff at either. And I should note too, that is only for his 2020 campaign. That is not accounting for how much money he's taken from these groups for his entire time in DC. Now, it's also true, too, that, yes, he has had a very long-standing relationship with Israel, even Benjamin Netanyahu, actually. However, there's also no denying the fact that this kind of money, propping up his campaigns to keep him in Congress, that kind of money isn't doing much to even invite him to reconsider his beliefs. Rather, it's constraining him, forcing him to stick to the same BS line that he's been tossing out to the American public for the past 40, 50 years. Israel has a right to defend itself. It's disgusting that this incentive exists in today's American politics. This, my friend, is the unnatural state of affairs. Our politicians are unwilling to prevent a plausible genocide and really involvement in another war because they don't want to risk pissing off their donors. Otherwise, they risk losing their next election. So rather than represent the people, rather than simply use their levers of power to prevent one of the most horrific crimes known to humanity, they sell out to their donors, ignoring the will of their constituents, their client states' war crimes, and the slaughter of innocent civilians. Hey friend, that's all I've got for today, but thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of The Unnatural State of Affairs. The Unnatural State of Affairs broadcasts on WMTS 88.3 FM in Murfreesboro, Tennessee from
4 to 6 p.m. on Fridays.
The broadcasted version is censored, but I do also have a full DJ hour in the broadcasted version. I mostly play punk rock music and some rap music as well. And if you can't tune in at that time, though, you can also find the uncensored versions of all my talk show segments that day on my Substack, The Kennel, and you can also find audio-only versions on Spotify. If you liked what I had to say, hit that like button. If you have any thoughts that you want to share, hit me up in the comments section down below. And if you want to be notified of the next upload that I make, hit that subscribe button. You'll get an email in your inbox the next time I make an upload, and you'll also get a notification through the Substack app if you have that on your device. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good one.